Gender, everything is defined by gender in this world. Is it or not? For me, that was a big question. For me, that has always been a very confusing question because there was a time I identified as a male. There was a time I was told how males should be. And as I grew, I was around 7 or 8, I questioning what's different with me. And I realized there's something different about my gender. By the time I was 11 or 12, I very clearly knew that I'm a homosexual man and, well, or a boy. And it didn't stop there. I was still very, very confused as grew. As I was growing up, I constantly questioned different things about me. Then finally, I would say at the age of 21, I just knew. I just officially is what is called coming out and realized and said that I am a gay man. I'm homosexual. I'm proud of myself and everything. But this is the fun part. Not long ago, just around 6 or 7 years ago, I once again questioned my sexuality. Now, the question was I questioning my sexuality or was I questioning me being a male? And this conversation is not about my attraction. This conversation is not about homosexuality. I want to be very clear about that. This conversation is about I could not pinpoint and be clear what really is my gender. And around 6 or 7 years ago, I related more to the term non-binary, that I don't belong to male or female construct. And don't get me wrong, not that there's anything wrong with anything, but I'm not transgendered. I am not transvestite. I have friends who are transgender. I understand what that is, but I just still knew something is still not right. I am not any of those. All of these definitions, all of these labels don't really define who I am. And then here's the fun part. Once I realized and once I recognized that I am non-binary, now the other non-binary people challenged my non-binariness, and heterosexual people, religious people, business people all challenged my non-binary identity, my being attracted to men. And all of that played a very strange role in my professional and business life, because as long as I was a straight heterosexual male in business, my value, my views mattered. Once I came out, things changed a little. Once I came out again as non-binary, things changed a lot more. So it was just very, very confusing already. Who am I? And then on top of that, certain expectations that businesses had, that colleagues had, that brands had, that teams had, my family had, my friends had. And they questioned, do I really know who I am? And why am I coming up with these fancy labels? But here's the thing. These are not fancy labels. These are the realizations that I had over time. Now, let's segue into something totally different. As a male who identified first as gay, then as non-binary, I saw a lot of locker room talk towards women, towards homosexuals, towards transgendered, and I'm talking about locker room talk in business, in offices. People who did not know who I am, what my label was, what I identified as, would openly say things that they would not say in front of a woman, that they would not say in front of a homosexual or a person who identifies anything other than a cisgendered male. Similarly, women would either love me for being their gay best friend or would try and convince me that I need to go and get checked. All that. But what I'm getting at is this gender construct had been, until I understood what it was, it had been such, it's almost like weight management issues. Like you're always struggling with, am I overweight? Am I underweight? Should I look like this? Should I, do I need to lose weight? Do I need to gain weight? Do I need to have more muscle? Similarly, the gender played the role for me. And that's where recently I had conversations with my guest tonight, Dr. Pauline Crawford. And in those conversations, she defined a few things for me that really made a lot more sense. And that made me question, wait, do I still know what my gender is, or does gender construct really matter? So we're going to talk about all that. And I just want to bring my guest up, Dr. Pauline Crawford-Omps, and let's start the Almost Naked conversation on Dramaniac TV. And by the way, I'm Sebastian One, the Almost Naked CEO, and this is my guest, Dr. Pauline Crawford-Omps.
Hi there, Sebastian. So good to listen to your story. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm thrilled to discuss this nitty-gritty subject called gender.
Right. And, that's where I will, first of all, before we start that, I want people to know a little bit about who you are, what you do, why gender is something that's, or gender dynamics is important. We'll get into that. But if you don't mind introducing a little bit about your work background.
Well, my background is that I have been officially in business for 30 years, studying people, human beings in the business world. So the corporate world of the UK and Asia Pacific, and now in America. So I'm British, but I live in Nevada, Las Vegas. And one of the things I realized is that human beings around the world, we function in certain basic ways. And so I started looking at how they interacted as men and women. And I came across this idea of gender dynamics. So actually the dynamic between people based on, as you were saying, the construct around gender. And over 30 years working in every sector, tech, pharmaceuticals, banks, law, you name it. I've worked in there, and I've worked with ministries as well. And it's very much about behavior for me and not identity. So maybe I'm defining gender in a different way. And one of the things that I just want to put in here is that when I first started talking about gender dynamics, what I found with audiences that when I said, what does gender mean? Most audience thought it meant women.
Right.
So I used to say, well, we all have a gender. And then you look at the actual explanation of gender. When you look at gender identity, it's different to just looking at biology. And,
right.
And that's where I started studying, because my own story, like yours, was that I was kind of confused about who I was as rather a tomboy adventurer young girl. I sometimes felt different to my more what I would call feminine female sisters, although I knew I was heterosexual and that was fine. And I had no problem with homosexuals and different people, but there seemed to be this confusion about the word gender, and it's increased.
Right.
Seems to have increased a lot over the last few decades,
right.
because
and
it's important.
Right. And that is where, in this segment, that's what I want to talk about, the gender, the social construct, because what we know as gender or labels or behavior, it is all defined by either male or female. It is all kind of boxed into that male and female, which again, over the years, I had my own understanding, but once I started talking to you, I had understanding and clarity and more confusion. So let's talk a little bit more about gender social construct. And, as you're saying, you were identified as a tomboy. Now you're a female. So please go ahead.
Well, I think the whole thing about the social construct is we go back over the last 7 decades. So, the evolution of women coming into the fore more has also changed the balance, and also the whole identity about sexual identity has mixed in with gender. So we have to be very careful about what what gender actually means, what the word actually means. So in my work, I take it to mean our biology, but there is also the gender constructs around men should be like X, Y, Z, women
Right.
should be, the should be's, which of course are social constructs because they come from the past. So in the
Right.
days when men were very muscular, went down the mines, did all the hard work, went in the jungle, shot the animals, and the women all stayed at home around the campfire doing the cooking. I mean, we're talking centuries ago. But even
Right.
since the evolution of business, since the two world wars and beyond, we now work in a totally different way. We now have 5 generations at work. We have many sexual identities. We have some people who don't understand it, some people who do. And this is where the conversation has to be open-minded
Well,
in order to explore what it means.
which is where I would ask you, and you're just mentioning that already. After having conversation with you, I got more confused. I should have been clear, but I got more confused because, again, over the years, what I finally thought is clarity about my gender, again, it became something else. Because, you spoke about FM, MF, and I was like, wait, but is that me now? Do I have a new label? So if you can, let me just quickly acknowledge. So,
Yeah.
hi, Kathy. Kathy is my virtual American mom. Thank you,
Oh,
Kathy.
good.
And Alicia, she is the director of the show. And thank you. Yes, it is an interesting conversation. We are going to actually learn a lot. I think the last couple of weeks, I learned so much from Pauline. I needed to bring her on. And, so Pauline, talking about, I thought I had clarity. And again, since you came, I now realize more that biological gender, the social construct, again, it's totally different things.
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I think there's the biology, the social construct, and also the sexual context.
Right.
So in my work, I'm very straightforward. I get to the biology first. And what I was exploring with my clients, it actually started when I was an image consultant, and I actually observed that certain structures of body, and what I mean by your actual bone structure, as of your biological pieces, started defining whether you were a man or woman, but also your structure defined how masculine or how feminine you are. So
Right.
actually, one of the things I was sharing with you is that if we only look at men and women, then male, female, then it is a binary system. But we know that there are many types of men and many types of women. Therefore, it can't be totally a binary system. So in the days when Dr. John Gray wrote Mars and Venus, and we started saying, men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
But where's the funny part? Because you said, these two binaries are not. And then I said non-binary. I said, well, that's not even non-binary is not really the clear definition. So what did you mean by that?
Well, I'm a mathematician, and I love geometry. So I saw it as and also women tend to think and men often think either or. So there may be that division. So what I studied was with the male physiology and physicality, and if they were very, dare I say, left brain, there was a simplicity about is this either or, whereas women are very circular. They have a menstrual cycle. We have an emotional system which is just different to men. It's not that we're more emotional. I would say everybody's emotional. If you don't have emotions, then you're probably dead.
Right.
When we look at different types of women and different types of men, we see a range of men, some of who are much more structurally straight and angular and more masculine, and some who are, dare I say, softer in physique. And this doesn't necessarily relate to any particular sexuality. So you can be heterosexual, homosexual, or transsexual, and your body structure can define a sense of masculine and feminine. So I'm using the words masculine and feminine in terms of almost a yin-yang energy.
Well,
And the reason why is because when you, and I love the fact that you presented me this non-binary, because I also was tackled by other conversations about, oh, you've just got a binary system. And I think,
right,
well, not. And the truth of it is that the reason I didn't want a binary system was because I knew I wasn't the same as all my sisters.
right,
And I wanted a way of understanding my masculine energy
right,
in myself as a mother and grandmother and a heterosexual woman. Now, when I work with lesbian women, they understand this totally. And what they love is being on the map with everybody. So
right,
it's like the first layer is biology and physicality, physiology.
right,
And we're looking at what are the behavior patterns in terms of simple conversations, communication, relationships. And then we have to layer in all the other aspects. So it is very relevant whether you're lesbian, gay, trans, bi, that's all on top. And also whether you're a baby boomer like me or you're X-gen like you, I think you are, or maybe you're millennial or you're digital, or you're from Afghanistan or China or Malaysia or America or England. You
right,
know, what race we are, what ethnicity, what ability we are. So our, if you like, where I'm defining gender dynamics is to understand the dynamic between you and everybody you meet. And I love your reference to, as you were identifying yourself, other people were trying to understand you. And that's where the confusion comes in, because if we live in a world where everybody is the same, so we lived
right,
in a world where every man was the same and every woman was the same, we'd have a binary system.
right,
But we don't. We live in this beautiful mixed world of different types of men, different types of women. But what I discovered is that if you like, the operating system, the baseline biology tends to imply certain basic behaviors, like, for instance, that men tend to be on-off switch, yes, no, task focused. Women tend to be multitasking and multiple conversations. And this
right,
is nothing to do with masculine and feminine. So for
right,
myself, if I'm a masculine woman, masculine minded woman, and I'm meeting a feminine minded woman, we're both still women and we're both working on the same operating system. So
right,
you could look at it like computers. It's like having a PC and a Mac. We have a Windows program that goes across both of them. And when we look at the program, it appears to be reading the same, but we know the two computers' operating systems are different.
right. And that's where the interesting thing comes, because as you're defining, for me, as you said, people were getting confused because they were trying to box me into either a
Yeah,
behavior or a label. But that was also confusing for me because, again, I was raised by my parents. I was raised to be very open-minded, but the society around me, the culture around me,
yes,
the workplaces around me, I was expected to be a certain way as a male, or
yes,
a person with a male body. I was expected to be a certain way. I was expected
yeah,
to do certain things, and they didn't seem natural to me. They didn't seem to be who I was. So,
yes,
and we'll get into gender dynamics. Before that, I want to talk a little bit about the back room, back talk, the locker room talk.
yeah,
As I was saying, as long as I identified as a male and there were other male, they were comfortable talking, saying certain things towards females or towards male who were not as masculine,
yes,
things that they would not say in public or in front of their children or in front of their, or on camera. They would not
yes,
say. Usually, it's all off the records, and we all know there's been a gentleman famous for that recently in recent history. So,
yes,
we're not going into politics. So, what I did not understand, and I still don't, same people are happy to do a certain conversation. And what I find is in workplace, when these conversations are happening behind your back, doesn't matter whether you're homosexual, whether you're female, whether you're male,
mm,
but if it's happening behind your back, that the workplace dynamic isn't really what it seems to be, and that shows in your actual teamwork, right?
Yes. And basically what we're talking about is bad behavior. You know,
Right.
it you have to say, well, some people say, well, they're all men together, so their locker room talk is what it is. But and women can do the same about men. But you have to challenge, why do we say anything which is untoward about anybody? So it comes down to our values about life. So if I believe that gossip is bad, toxic behavior is bad, that I don't want to go there, then I don't badmouth anybody. I
Right.
might have a view, like, women might say, oh gosh, all men, they think in such straight lines. I wish they talked in circles, but it's not
Right.
necessarily back chat. It's not something really nasty. So,
Right.
a man who works in a meeting with women and is really very nice to them, and then he goes out with his mates and says, oh God, these women are dreadful, they're so bitchy or whatever,
Right.
then that's just bad behavior. And you
Right.
have to look at the core culture that we're in and say, what is our value about good or bad behavior?
So I
And
guess it would be fair to say it's less to do with gender. Yes, of course, it is to do with how you're socially, raised and all that. It's less to do with the gender, but the actual individual behavior and the culture you've grown up in, right?
well, I think it is, but because gender is also about sex, and we have to be honest about that, it's about attraction or non-attraction. I think it's an easy, it has been an easy target, and we know
Right.
that when anybody says something nasty about ourselves or our own tribe, then we respond in a way that says, hey, that's not on. I mean, like the classic is, oh my God, did you see that bad driver? She must be a woman. And I
Right.
go, what? Like, I don't
Right.
really, I don't
Exactly.
really,
And that is a very common statement. That is a very common statement, which is where, I really want to get into gender dynamics. So I
yeah,
just want to get to our next segment. So in our first segment, we did talk about gender construct, social construct, what genders are, binary, non-binary, male, female. So I just want to, once again, if you're just tuning in right now, I am Sebastian One, the Almost Naked CEO, and you're watching Almost Naked Conversation on Romaniac TV. And with me is my guest, Dr. Pauline Crawford-Omps. She is not only all about gender dynamics, she is a dynamic person. I'm not even going to say dynamic woman, she's a dynamic person. So I want to just get into the next section, which is gender dynamics. And in gender dynamics, what I want to touch really on is what is it? Why do we need to understand these dynamics in workplace, in personal life? So let's talk a little bit more about that. You have already been talking about it. So first of all, what is gender dynamic for people who don't understand the term?
yes, I think the main thing is to focus on dynamics. So we don't work in a solo way, very, very rarely. We're always interacting with people. And that's really where the dynamics come in. Now, whether we're in a team or we're in a one-to-one, or maybe on occasion we're sitting at our own desk, but we need to get up and we need to interact with people. We spend our life passing people in the street. There's a dynamic everywhere. So gender dynamics is looking at, how do we create relationships between our team players, our colleagues, our families. So the focus is, as we look to the first segment about identity, this is about, how do we build relationships,
Right.
and how do we build them through conversation, which is a further advance from communication.
Right. So in a workplace, when you are, and we're talking about locker room chat and everything, and there's a different dynamic on your face and a different dynamic behind the scene.
Yeah.
So in that case, first of all, my biggest question is that locker room chat, and what I see, especially where women are in place of power, they are the bosses or they are the CEOs, they are the C-level executives. Men are very, very, obedient, if you would, in the meetings and conversations. But as soon as she's gone or she turns her back, the conversation changes, and suddenly, pardon my French, suddenly she becomes a bitch in their, conversation. Or it's the other way around. If uh, the female bosses say different things about male juniors, which they don't say in front of them. So how does the dynamic play a role in that, and how can we work on that?
Well, what we got to remember is that the two parties are different. So what we're talking about is the translation. So, for instance, if men talk in very, if you like, straight line conversations, they may be more instructional, more telling us what to do, maybe bullet points. And the women are talking in tangents and going off into questions that don't really need answers. The two parties are often not understanding each other. And this is what I teach my classes. It's like with women, I say often we don't understand that the man is talking in very short sentences and bullet points. He doesn't necessarily want us to go off into a complete tangent of chattering for too long. So we need to understand how to open the dynamic in a way that each party understands the other. And I'll give you an example that if a man is very, he's the boss in the meeting, and he's telling, he's telling this is what we're going to do. He needs validation first and a summary from you about what you understand, and then deliver your idea. Very often, and this is very well researched, men are answering each other with an affirmation. So the boss says something and everybody at the room, all the men say, oh, yes, boss, yes, boss, yes, boss.
Right.
And then the women says, oh, what about blah, 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 blah,
Oh my
blah.
God, I have never thought about this in the way you're just saying. I've never actually thought about this.
Yeah,
And it actually is true. Alicia is saying stereotypes are very destructive too. Absolutely, Alicia. Stereotyping is half the evil, I think.
yes,
When you just define this is how men are supposed to be or women are supposed to be,
yeah.
this is how you're supposed to behave, I think half the problem comes there. And Carol is saying, this is incredible. Thank you for bringing this to the forefront. You are so right. Bashing one group over the other is not equality. You're talking about important stuff here. Thank you, Carol. Absolutely.
One of the key things to remember is that if we value differences and the differences around the table, then we need to honor how we incorporate every difference. So if somebody is talking in straight lines or bullet points, it doesn't mean we have to do that, but we need to acknowledge that that's what they are doing.
Well,
and we may
speaking
need
of straight lines,
pause.
sorry for cutting you off. I just saw Kathy's comment. Speaking of straight lines, Kathy says men are clear in their intentions. Now, you know what? I kind of disagree with that, because not just me, I have seen loads and loads and loads of men who are not thinking in straight lines, who are not, I would say they go as much in circles as I can imagine. So
Well, this is where it comes back to there are different types of men. So in the range of men, from the more masculine-minded man to the more feminine-minded. And remember, I'm not saying sexually feminine, I'm saying feminine-minded, which implies he's highly intuitive, he's more likely to be a philosopher, a word person. He's thinking ideas and feelings, as opposed to the masculine male who potentially is talking much more in bullet points. So in the room now, you've got this range. And I've been interviewing a lot of men of this category, and they say one of the challenges for them is being in a room with too many masculine men who are talking in bullet points. And you would talk in that more feminine way.
I agree. Being in a room with too many masculine men, that was half my confusion, because the conversation for me business wise became more about, am I speaking more manly enough or not, rather than the idea I had, rather than the conversation I could bring to the table, rather than focusing on the actual skill and talent that I had to offer. The conversation
Yes.
changed because I wasn't sure.
Well, this is where life is changing, and I believe it's changing for the better, because the feminine-minded man is standing up for empathy, for compassion, for humanizing the workforce. This is the shift that's happening in the world. The masculine men are now wondering what the hell's going on with their own mates, but
Right.
it's happening. And where the balance in the boardroom or the leadership is, the balance between those different types of men is as important as the balance of men and women in the room.
Right. And Alicia is saying, yes, Pauline, there's a need to define it outside sex and sexuality. And there's actually another comment Alicia made, if producer can please put that up. Men tend to use more assertive language, while mostly women need to explain more. Now, here's the thing. I want to take both of these comments. Producer, if you can go back to the first comment first. You know, I find that in my personal experience, not always to be true. I'm not saying that it is, it is not true, but I find that there's a lot of times I don't agree with that. I've seen so many women who are assertive. I've seen women who actually, at the same time, I agree. It's like I'm contradicting myself, but that I've seen both genders do that. And if we go to the second comment Alicia just had, we need to define outside of sex and sexuality. That is true, because I think half my struggle personally has been trying to define, is it about sexuality? Is it about, for me, dynamic has been really confusing.
Yes. So I want to just answer that, Sebastian, because you, as a feminine-minded male, speaks in this more feelings, intuitive feelings way. It doesn't matter whether you're homosexual or heterosexual. That is the nature of that behavior. And I often quote Nelson Mandela as being a feminine-minded male. He was heterosexual, he was very strong, but he was highly intuitive. And he would observe and think and talk in a very different way to some of the masculine male leaders we know in the world. Same with women. So the assertive woman is potentially a woman who has either a natural masculine energy, or she's a very empowered woman who wants to be in those roles of power. I believe this also needs to change, because being a masculine-minded woman, we could quote somebody like Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is one of those, as opposed to a more feminine leader who is also strong, and I believe feminine leader in India who is like this. So everybody can be strong, but our style is slightly different.
Right.
Now, one of the things is true, I think there was a comment somewhere, is that men are more maybe obedient, instructional. They work on a sort of yes-no basis.
Right.
Even if you're a feminine-minded male and you're heterosexual, it doesn't matter. You may be old or young. You might be from China or America. But the issue is, how do we come to conversation? So you're more likely to have lots of conversation, which is about feelings, as opposed to the masculine male who is, to be honest, not as interested in chatter.
और भी comments हैं वो कहें.
So when you're in the business world, you may have different conversations to when you're at home. But your behavioral, your gender dynamic behavior gets rid of stereotypes around what men should do or women should do. But women do, one of the things is very observational. Women tend to ask questions in order to expand their conversation, whereas men often ask questions to gather an answer.
Right. I want to just go through that comment from Carol. She said, yes, you're speaking of stereotypical communication styles where male is associated with straightforward, a positive, and a female is associated with wandering, flowery, and negative. Both styles are necessary and helpful. Do you want to comment on that, Pauline? Because I think she also says women who speaks in male associated styles are spoken of in male terms rather than just a person. That's Carol. I love that point. I love that. may as you were talking about tomboy, you know.
Well, that's right. And what's interesting is, and this is where I get people into a magical conversation, which is about dropping all these judgments and exploring it. So if I'm a masculine-minded female, I might be slightly more bullet point and abrupt in my business conversations naturally because of that. But I'm still working on a template which is in circles and very conversational. And with women, we talk things out much more than men who tend to get into action, certainly in the business world. But these are all aspects of doing business. Now, the thing for me is that doing business is changing. So we're now talking about business in which compassion and empathy, humanizing the workforce, all of those things are bubbling up to the surface. This is what I work with in terms of creating a corporate heart. So when you were moving towards a business environment which is based on love and conversation, this is where women and men who are, in your terms, non-binary,
Right.
but you know, what I call the feminine-minded male and the masculine-minded woman, we actually come to this business environment with a whole mixture, and actually it's not so polarized.
Right. Well, you know, I want to talk about that. There's a comment that I saw from Alicia. Yeah, she said it can also be learned behavior, how to be more assertive in language, to be more masculine in the boardroom. I love that comment. And there's one thing very interesting, and I find that in comment, Alicia and Pauline, is, you know, again, we're talking about to be more masculine in the room. I find that to be very interesting statement. Why are we? My question is, why are we trying to be more masculine in the room and not just more assertive, irrespective of the gender?
There is. What you've got to remember is that being assertive is a very proactive state of empowerment, whoever you are. So let's define masculine and feminine, almost like yang and yin. So when we use masculine language, we're looking at things that are slightly more directive, decision-making, doing the task. And the feminine is, how do we build empathy into doing this task? So what we're looking at is the nature of business. So it's like, if we have a square and a circle, we want to build the car with circular wheels so it rolls round, but the base of the body of the car with a square because it's very strong. So I see masculine language as more straight line, strong decision making, and the feminine is the packaging around it, which enables us to feel trusted and loved and cared for. And what you've got in business now is we need both. Whereas in, you know, we go back a century when men were going down the mine to dig the coal, it was a very transactional job. We don't have those now. We have very fluid, it's all about relationship management, we still need to get the task done. So I think we've got to be careful not to put stereotypes on the words masculine and feminine, because like yin and yang, they come together. So
you know what? To be honest, we need to hi Angelita. Angelita is one of our very, very loyal viewers, and I'm glad to see you back again. So Pauline, I think this conversation, and we have another segment in a second, but this conversation isn't something that can be covered in 1 or 2 episodes. I think we need to have lots more conversations, and I love that we're having this dialogue. Alicia said, yes, we need both styles because we're all interconnected. And yeah, I agree with that. Carol says, the Eastern yin and yang. I love that. There you go. So yes, we are. Look, Carol, we are very, very global in thinking, in audience, and guests. So yes, we bring everything, all the spices in there. So, one thing that I want to say from this is trying to, for me, that word, masculine energy in the room, I even associate the word leadership earlier with masculinity, with male. Now, why I'm saying that is, if somebody is a role model, which I now learned by intention, you're considered a hero if you do something great, not a role model. I think role model is more gender neutral. Calling a woman a hero is kind of confusing. What are you trying? She has to be like a man to do something heroic. Why don't we
Yeah.
have a word which is not gender neutral for the word heroic? Is what I think of. Um, Go
We,
ahead.
we can all be heroic. I mean, that's the lovely thing about this world is that over the last decades, three things have changed our world. Digital has changed our world, all the technology. Entrepreneurship has changed our world, and the changing demographic has changed the world because we're now all out there on the playing field. And that's really significant. We're not yet in all the top levels, but men and women are out there wanting to work, wanting to have families. Everything comes into the mix. And leadership is changed as well. I mean, there's a lot of talk about leadership needs to be inclusive.
Mhm.
Whether you're a man or woman, how
Yeah.
do you include your people? How do you understand how to make their life human at work? How to make it healthy? How to make it engaged, enthusiastic? That's that's the shift we're seeing in the world. We still got the
Well,
old, but we're
let's
shifting
talk
away from
about
that.
that in our next segment, because that is what next segment is about, what you're doing to actually make that happen. So if you're just tuning in right now, this is Almost Naked Conversation, and I am Sebastian One, the Almost Naked CEO. With me is my guest, Dr. Pauline Crawford-Omps, and she is a gender dynamics specialist. She is phenomenal since she has come in my life. She's actually it's changing my thinking, and that's what this Almost Naked Conversation is all about: to actually have unfiltered conversation about topics that people don't really want to talk about, or we need to create more awareness about. So in the next segment, we are going to talk about what Dr. Pauline Crawford-Omps is doing to bring that positive gender dynamics and change and introduce the real synergy, as she calls it. So you have, Pauline, real synergy 2020 goals. Tell
I
us what
do.
it is.
Well, I believe, and it's very important to focus on the word real. So the word real for me means authentic, genuine, be yourself, be natural. You know, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual or transsexual, whether you're old or middle aged or X gen, Y gen, digital, whatever it is, whatever country you come from, whatever color of your skin, are you being real? Are you listening to the perspective of the differences around the table? So my goal is that organizations really, from leadership all the way down, they understand that people and profit is the way we make sustainable future. And we know that it's happening in so many ways. We have businessmen at the top of major organizations who are now saying, "Oh, we realize that people are as important as profit."
Right.
The top man at Goldman Sachs said that they're not going to IPO any company now that has an all-male board. So there's we haven't got the change in yet, but it's coming, and there are lots of examples of. There's a great example with Aetna Insurance where the CEO Mark Bartarelli, he changed the whole culture to inclusivity because he had a life-changing incident, and he realized that life is as important as business. So real synergy is understanding all the parts. So when it comes to men and women of any nature, I
Right.
believe that because we have different views of the world, the and the either or. If we come
Right.
together, a bit like parenting the world, we will parent wonderful organizations. So my goal is that every human being works with their passion, they work in the company that they love working in, and that we are healthy, high performers, and we actually make the future of our economic world better and our society and our family better. So you know, we'll achieve world harmony through loving what we do at work. That's a very, very big mission. But I do believe we've got everything we need now to make this happen.
That to actually achieve that, we need people to come in, people to I think this is where what I am learning from this conversation and the conversations we've had before the show as well is I think we need to see people as people and not the genders only,
Yes,
not the
yes,
boxes. You know how, as they say, you can't fix a box in a circle or a circle in a box. So you need to be able to see the circles and boxes together as
yeah,
containers. How about that?
yeah.
Right. So
Absolutely. And a 360 degrees. So whoever walks into your room, into your table, around your table, you take them as a human being, um, and you understand them. You understand their nature as a human being. And that will include their gender dynamic. It'll also include their preferences, whether they're visual or auditory or kinesthetic. And it will include every experience in their life because you share it into the mix. So we have to listen a lot to
right.
people.
I
And
was actually just going to say that I think it's a lot more about listening. It's a lot more about, I guess, and the real synergy in gender dynamics together keeps bringing to my mind, if you combine it all, it's about understanding, understanding each
yes,
other, and that understanding has to rise above the body, the gender, the social construct, and it has
yeah,
to, as I said, it has to be about people listening and trying to. I suppose it's a very old customer service saying, put yourself in your customer's shoes. So just literally trying to understand where is the other person coming from, why are they saying or doing or thinking the way they're doing. And
yes,
look, I personally believe I have my own challenges and I make my own mistakes, but I personally believe uh, there are times when I don't agree with something. There are times when I do not see it the way the other person is seeing, but it takes me a little bit. I don't have a shame in admitting that it takes me a while, but I do come around when I go back and think, but why did they react that way? Why did they say that? Why did they feel that? Why am I feeling that they are reacting this way? And when I try to ask those questions to myself, it does help a fair bit to try and understand that things from their angle, or at least to try and open a dialogue, right?
absolutely. And I think the thing is that if we want to have conversations without judgment, which is really where stereotypes and blocks come, then we have to be not judgmental ourselves. So we have to um, be able to say, I see what you're saying. I see you and hear your perspective. I might not necessarily agree with it, but I accept it as different to mine. So this again comes back to valuing differences, because there may be a situation where you agree to disagree. That's the classic kind of agreement. But by opening your mind to the possibility of differences making a difference in your world, then everything is valuable. Does that make sense?
No,
So
absolutely.
we've got
Ab-
more mixture and more qualities that we can share if we avoid judgments. And it's not easy because we come from
that
a
is the
world
key
which
word,
is
if we
very
avoid judgments.
judgmental.
And you know what? Here's something that I want to say. It's if we avoid judgments not only towards others but towards ourselves,
Oh, yes. And this is
right?
the thing, it's one of the things to focus on, and we can carry on this conversation next time, is what value do you bring to the room? And do you know it? And do you share it? In my experience, I bring this value. In my experience, I am Sebastian, and I've had these experiences in my life, and this is how I like to deal with myself as a man in conversation and feeling, and by sharing more and not accepting other people's judgment of us as anything to do with us. That classic statement, what other people think of me is none of my business. That's something to live by.
That is something. It's funny, very known, but that is a statement that I recognized only a couple of years ago. Is really what think of me is none of my business, and that my mindset, because that is where
Yeah.
I tried being successful despite many things. just constantly was like too busy thinking what others think of me. And irony is telling others not to do that and absolutely makes a lot of sense. Before the time has run out so fast, and I think this conversation will continue. So I
I
would
hope
love to
so.
work out a time with you and bring you back on topic. Before we what is in today's day and age when the labels, the non-binary, fluid dynamics are improving, current time immediate and change in our work dialogue and to
I, I think we need to, um, yeah, I think the first thing is to be okay about sharing who we are and inviting other people to share what their value is and what their values are. So, for instance, we usually go into work and say, well, what is it you do? I do this, this is my title. But if we actually have conversations about, so what do you value most in life? What's your highest value? Um, what kind of value base do you run your life? Do we start talking at a very different level? So I think that's where we need to be sharing at a values based and values lesson with each other, and then see how the conversation seeds through our curiosity and our imagination, rather than trying to backbite or backchat about, well, you didn't do this and I didn't do that. And it's what I call a value creation cycle. And we can explore this more next time. But it's basically saying, I
you
own
know,
what I do. I really value what you do. And let's do it together.
right, absolutely. And you just literally read my mind. We need to do it again, and we need to actually talk about the back chat. We need to talk about the locker room talk, and we need to talk about. I believe all so-called genders are doing it in different ways, and that's my mom. So I'm excited she's here. Thank you. She says, "Wow, nice conversation. Thank you."
Oh, hi.
Well, I'm her son, so she has to say that. No, so she loves you, by the way.
Oh, I love
She
you too.
absolutely. I think you guys have already been chatting now, so I'm glad about that. So
Yes,
what I was saying is that we do need to carry on this conversation about how the different versions of locker room chats are going,
yes,
happening across the board, and what can we do to actually bring positivity and creativity together to, as you said, to understand each other and see what we can do together,
yes.
right?
And
So
together we can create a new awareness in the world, I'm convinced, and keep spreading
absolutely.
those smiles.
Absolutely, absolutely agree. Thank you so much for this conversation. I am sorry, the time is running out, and we do need to do this again. So thank you so much. And yeah, I will see you next time. We'll work out a new time. Don't go anywhere. Please stay in the green room.
I will do. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's commented and has listened in. We need more conversations like this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, so that was Almost Naked Conversation, and we talked about gender dynamics. We talked about, the back chat and the locker room conversations, and how gender dynamics, do play a role in positive workplaces. Thank you, Patty. Patty says hello to Dr. Pauline. Just left, but she'll be back next time. So thank you for tuning in anyway, and you can watch the replay. So we are on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, Twitch. And there's other places I can't even remember. So you can go and check us out. So in this conversation, really, we haven't even scratched the surface. We haven't even started the conversation, to be honest. And again, I started with a totally different angle, but in this conversation, that's what happens in Almost Naked Conversation. It just takes us where it takes us. And with Dr. Pauline, I think we need to bring her back several times and carry on this conversation. This was Almost Naked Conversation. And with me, Sebastian One, I'm the Almost Naked CEO, and this is on Dramaniac TV. This show was directed by Alicia Khoury, who is the Red Carpet CEO and also executive producer in Dramaniac TV. And behind the scenes team, I just want to acknowledge Sanjit Kumar is the producer, Kirti Hari is the engagement director, and Santosh, who just commented, is the legals and relations consultant. So thank you guys for tuning in. And let's carry on this conversation further and talk more about gender and any topic you have that needs a dialogue. Any conversation that you need to get it off your chest and let people know, create awareness, any taboo things that haven't been spoken about around you and you think there is a need, do get in touch. Log on to www.dramaniac.com and book yourself to be a guest, and let's start the conversation today. So thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time at Dramaniac TV, as we say, you dream big and we make it happen. See you guys.